Sometimes the smartest people make the worst money decisions. That is the problem that we're solving today. Because intelligence does not protect you from bad financial decisions. In fact, sometimes it makes them worse. Today, we're diving into neuroeconomics, information adequacy bias, and why even elite thinkers can be tricked by their own brains. Will Young is back. He is a CFP behavioral wealth architect and a specialist in stock selection, neuroeconomics, and super forecasting. So he studies how the brain makes financial decisions and, more importantly, how it misleads us. And today, in a world flooded with data, with opinions, with so much outside noise, and instant access to information, the real danger really isn't ignorance, it's the illusion that we know everything. So today we're going to unpack how awareness sometimes becomes alpha. It's so good to have you back, Will.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. This is a really important piece adding to it because it's just one of the biggest missteps I see with almost everybody who has acquired a lot of wealth.
Yeah. So, why do you think highly intelligent, well educated people make such poor money making decisions? Like, where does that come from? Is it overconfidence?
It starts with the overconfidence bias. When you're successful in one area of your life, you think you can go across all platforms and be smart. And
Mm,
you see it all the time. And one of the easiest ways, just to give people a simple way, you have all these billionaires who basically buy a sports team with money, and then
right.
they make all these stupid decisions and constantly have terrible teams because they just assume I'm smarter than everybody else. I'm just going to come in and beat everybody. And that's just not how it works. It happens to almost everybody. And you have these people who think I'm going to spend money, I'm going to make the best decisions. And time again, they make horrible decisions because they can't see their blind spots. And so that's essentially where it leads from. This overconfidence is really a distortion. And then there's three areas. That's over precision, believing you know something more accurately than you do, and not using Bayesian probability. So you just make a claim, and then over placement, believing you're better than everybody else. And it's like in driving. I believe 95% of all people who drive think they're better than average. Statistically, that's not a
That's funny.
possibility. You know what I mean? It can't be true.
No,
And
not if you're driving behind someone who's a terrible driver.
I'm a terrible driver. I know that, and I don't lie to myself. But most people say I'm a good driver. It's just the way we're wired. And when you've had success or you have a fancier car, you think you're a better driver. It doesn't make you a better driver. You just have more money than somebody else. But a
Yeah.
lot of that could just be luck. And people will never attribute luck to their success. It's always skill. And,
Mm,
if you were born 10 years after Bill Gates essentially, founded Microsoft, you would not have started a software company per se because you had missed that time. Now it's the AI time. And a lot of what you have success in is luck. So that's why you have to track it. And then another way is you're overestimating your ability. You take one area. I'm so smart at math or I'm so smart at engineering. I can do this. And some of the biggest disasters I've ever seen are brilliant engineers, aerospace, mechanical, electrical, building, and they just lost everything they had in 2000 and 2008. One of the wealthiest investors I ever knew, he had about $11 million and he bet it all on Bank of America because he knew everything and before the crash and it went from 50 to $5. And he
jeez.
was absolutely certain he could read a spreadsheet. And he was right, he could read it, but they lied. And yes, so these are some of the crazy things that happen. And I think that's where we're at today. A lot of smart investors think I've been doing well for the past several years. The US is doing great. I know AI, I know technology, and this is going to not work out well for them. This
Mm.
is the disaster.
Do you think overconfidence like causes a little like carelessness as well? Like a little bit of like playfulness in certain ways? Like, I don't know. You know what I mean by that? Like almost like they don't care so much until it's too late.
Yes, because you have this, you feel safe. Your decisions in the past have always worked out. And the more you believe you're smarter than everybody else, the worse your decision hygiene will be. So Mark Cuban, he got very lucky with he sold his company broadcast.com for $5 billion at literally the peak of Yahoo's. Yahoo was like $423. I think when it got bought, it was like $20 a share. He sold it and kept that money. But all of his other business dealings that he's done, like he's even said all the companies, he's not made any money. And you're like, Mark Cuban? No, because people just assume they know more than they actually do because they had success in one area. Right time,
Right.
right place. And people were just buying .coms left and right. And so he would not be a billionaire if not for that. He wouldn't have been able
Right.
to translate that into other things. So that's essentially what happens over and over again. And I see it, and I really see it right now. Now more than ever, people have this extraordinary confidence because they've saved well. And I'm like, what happens if the stock market goes sideways for 5, 7, or 12 years? They'll panic. They'll pull money out. They'll make all these because that happened 68 to 82, 2000 to 2012, 2008 to 2012. And this is where they're going to think I have all this intelligence. I can outmaneuver people, and they can't because you're human and you're wired in a specific way. So anyway, their ego will be one of the worst things that happens.
Yeah. Intelligence, um, and then success sometimes gets the worst of people. And it causes their ego to come in and step in, and suddenly they think they know everything. And I think that's where everything goes sideways is the moment you think you know everything is that you're going to be rudely awakened because you're going to soon find out that you literally know nothing at all.
For you, yes. And I tell the story over and over again. People were like, you can't lose in real estate. And then of course we crashed the whole world with real estate.
Yeah,
And I'm like, but you told me there was zero chance you could do it. Well, if I hold it long enough, I'm like, well, you held it 15 years and you didn't make any money and now you're even. That's not a good investment.
right.
That's what I'm saying. So you have to really, it's not that you're attacking somebody. You're just trying to have them sit and say, how could I possibly know everything about everything? And that's where this success and gaining the money. They talk about this one Merrill Lynch guy who retired with like $40 million. He had all his money leveraged and right before 2008, and then he lost everything because people typically take on more risk because they feel more confident. And
Yeah,
with more confidence, you stretch yourself further. And then all of a sudden, boom, it washes away in a breath, in a breath. And then all of a sudden, you've lost everything you worked for. And that's the mistake people often do is they put more into things they know more about, but you can't. And that's diversification, that's understanding global markets, global money. I've shifted money to Mexico because of the trade policies here. I've shifted money to Latin America, and now they're the top areas in the whole market this year
mm,
because I'm going where the money started to accumulate. And then as it accumulates, it goes faster. I bought gold and I thought it would go. So I'm just following that. People can't do that because they're all chasing NVIDIA. One of my top things that people talk about is, oh, NVIDIA, it's going to go. I'm like, we bought it. 3.5 years ago, you didn't even know who they were. Now everybody wants more of it, and it hasn't went up in 6 months, and it'll probably come down because they might build data centers and build things, but to me, do you remember you always heard about the 1849ers or the 49ers, San Francisco 49ers football team?
Yeah.
And they had, well, everybody went there to mine, but you know who made the most money? The people who had the shovels and the supplies.
Mm.
There weren't as many
Why?
stores because people have to buy shovels and dig. And so Caterpillar, as an example, sells to all the data center places that are being built. They make all the money because the other ones everybody's throwing money at, but you still have to buy the equipment. So they're selling all this equipment. So if half the data centers don't work, you're still going to have lots of equipment bought and used and paid for.
Mm. Right.
And that's the part that especially men have this huge blind spot. They're like, I know technology. Like, you really don't. And that's where you have to have a calm conversation and pull it out. Or a lot of people talk about crypto. And I've had people just really insult me and say things like, you don't know, you hate. I'm like, well, then look at my trading record. And Bitcoin is now below where it was 5 years ago. But you know what isn't? Caterpillar and Nvidia and AMD and all these other stocks. They're like, it'll come back. I said, I don't want to go up 100% and then lose 50% and be right back where I was 5 years ago.
Right.
And,
Right.
and they're like, I'm a long-term investor. I said, that's what everybody said. Everybody
Mm.
says I'm a long-term invest. I'm trying to make money. So everybody builds a narrative. The smarter you are, the more you'll sell yourself, typically, IQ wise. So it really requires EQ and JQ. And I recommend everybody read Daniel Kahneman, name is Tversky's work, the very first one published in 1973. It was the representative heuristic, judgments under uncertainty. And they would sit around with their friends, and everybody on earth has done this. And they'd say, what do you think your kid's going to be? They're going to be a doctor, a lawyer, engineer. Everyone on earth does this with the kids. You know what I mean?
Oh
And then you
yeah.
go back and you look at all their predictions, and everybody's wrong
A
because
thousand
it's
percent.
but in your mind at that time, you're really sure, like, oh, I can tell. You're going to be a lawyer. You like arguing. I'm like, but I mean, I think a lot of us like to argue. But the point I'm making is we build up these narratives, and we have what's called narrative. Everything in life, the story sells us. The best
Hmm.
story wins. If I tell you a great story and I'm less competent, you buy the story, not the person per se. So that's why con artists sell so much because they're great stories.
Yeah. The brain also loves pattern recognition. And so the brain feels so comfortable and confident when there's like a pattern. And in fact, the brain will look for patterns to make the body feel better.
That's exactly, yes. And so that is called the representative heuristic. And that
Mm.
is typically associated with the availability, meaning if you hear news about a stock, you'll start to all of a sudden see these patterns forming in your mind
Yeah.
like you know it. And yes, that's exact. So that I understand the piece. You understand what you're seeing. And then as it comes down, you have what's called the clustering illusion. You start to see oh, look, because you're aware of it, so you naturally gravitate to something. Like when I see a blue car or I see a specific type of car or phone, I'm like, oh, look at that. Because now it's on your mind, so it's easy and you start confirming it. And now you have this big narrative. So that's what happens in social groups. We don't like to invest against the social group, which means that when I sit with a client and I'm saying, we don't want any more AI, the cheap stuff is not here. They're like, why? I'm like, because I was begging you to get it 4 years ago. And you're like, we're not going to use it. Now we're using it. And now you want to buy it. It works the opposite. And so that's
Right.
where you get the peaks and valleys. And when it comes down, it might be a good value, it might not. But I remember having these conversations in 2022 when I was buying Apple, and they're like, I'm scared. I'm like, you have an Apple iPhone. You Google mapped over to get to me. You Google searched. They're not going out of business, and we're getting it at the cheapest price it's been in 10 years. So that's kind of how you shift people away from they're wrong to how can we go shopping for you?
Well, I was just going to ask you because the brain also loves certainty. And so
Yes.
the work that you're doing, it requires people to believe in the uncertainty. So how do you manage uncertainty when the brain is just obsessed with, confidence, security, and uncertainty, sorry.
No, you just nailed it. Judgments under uncertainty is side of the representative heuristic because we build up the patterns and then we have the illusion of certainty. That's where when you step into this very great work, it's the illusion of information adequacy. As soon as we gain just a tidbit of knowledge, I was coaching someone the other day, a friend, and they're like, "Wow, I know so much." I'm like, "You really don't, but you know enough to at least move forward." Because now all of a sudden you start processing and you're like, and I like that, but I also want to say be humble. I may not sound humble on these, but I am very humble with my models, but I'm not humble with the work that I do because I put in 4 hours a day. And after you do it about 15, 16 years, you understand where people are moving. But that's right. And that's where people don't actually write down and explain that they understand it. So I go, write it down on a scale of 1 to 10. How confident are you? And then write down what you know so that you can explain it to me as if you run NVIDIA or you run Google. And then they're like, well, I don't really know. And that's where you can get people without insulting them, without making their ego deflate and go, wow, there's so much to know. Just like,
Mm,
I don't watch the Winter Olympics and think I'm going to be a pro skier, but yet people comment on they should have done this, they should have done that.
I
You
know.
know,
Yeah.
you know what I
Well,
mean?
when I was growing up, my dad would scrutinize my brother's hockey skills. He would play a hockey game and then tell him all the things he should have done better. And I remember one day I was driving home from a hockey tournament and I was like, Dad, why don't you put on your own pair of skates and you show us how you can do that? Like it was just driving me insane.
So yes, so you're taking that's called an outside view, but most people take an inside view. And yes, for I was going to say hockey too because I know you're Canadian, but I saw it with my nieces growing up. I saw when I was a kid, why did you swing at that ball? I'm going, like all of a sudden everybody's an expert on everything. And
Yeah.
like 1 minute and with they're talking about Iran now, they're like, oh, I'm an expert on fighting Iran. I'm an expert on trade policy, tariffs. I'm like, how? Where do you get all the time in today? And so that's ultimately what leads to these huge blind spots because people feel like they're an authority or have enough to be smarter than other people. And once they can explain something in detail, I'll start to listen and I understand it. But people will do that all the time. Like, I heard this, I want to buy this stock or that. And then you look back at it and they always criticize me, which I do enjoy. They're like, well, you don't buy only winners. I'm like, yeah, if I only bought winners, I'd be on a yacht. You'd never see me again. You know what
Okay.
I mean? But I mean, I do very well for myself. I mean, but that's the point is you you're going to have losers because there are things that you can't forecast. You can't forecast things being cut, or you can't forecast accounting fraud at or United Healthcare. I mean, how could you guess that? You can't. Enron. So there's all these things that happen, and when people lie, cheat, and steal, or there's a concern now with AI causing software stocks to come down because you can now write a lot of your software with the AI stocks. I mean, AI companies. And I don't own any software stocks, so that's a perk because I don't. But the point I'm making is that all these people who are super confident have seen just just a massive drop. And the natural reaction is people want to think they're smart, they'll jump in and try to buy it. But are you buying something that's going to keep going down? Or are you going to buy something that could turn around and it was just misdiagnosed? So these are the things that you have to have these models because you might pick three stocks, two might come up and one comes down, but a lot of people just buy one because they're very confident. But that's not using the Bayesian probability. People are like, I'm going to buy this because it's going to go up. And then you bought IBM instead of Microsoft. And the thing you notice is Microsoft took off. So that's where you have to calm your ego and say, I don't know, but I know one of these will be successful. And
Mm.
that's ultimately how you, and that's hard for people because they like to have this certainty, like they know.
Yeah, 100%. So, can you define the information adequacy bias in simple terms?
The illusion of information adequacy bias. So
Yeah.
when we learn something, we automatically think we know a lot. Like when we read a book on psychology, we read a book on football, we learn some basic rules, we start to see the patterns that we start to try to put everything together very quickly.
Okay.
And th it's very common for people to learn just a little bit of information, and when they do, they fill the gap of all the things missing. That's what the illusion of information adequacy bias. So the problem is that if you get wrong information, how do you know if you trust that person? So if you're listening to a TV talk show, podcast, whatever, you hear this, and now you're like, I trust this person. I believe they're giving me good information. So you never actually check it. You just pile on this, like, I'm smart here. I'm smart here. I'm a good driver. I got my master's degree. I'll give you an example. My neighbor is like, I know computers better than everybody else. And I'm standing outside. I'm like, please don't say anything to me. Please, 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 please. Because, and this is true. I never thought I'd say this. And my other neighbor, Mitch, who I will say, he's very open-minded. And he's standing outside and this guy's he's like, I got a master's degree in business and engineering. I was like, okay, well, and he's asking me questions about why didn't I buy this or that? I'm like, well, I put the money here and I bought Google because they're making chips. He's like, Google doesn't make chips. You don't know anything. What are you, ignorant? And I'm thinking, so Mitch just Googles it and goes, yeah, they've been making chips since 2018. And he was so certain. And he had this illusion. He has all this information. He knows tech better than everybody else. And I'm like, I told you, like, don't, like, this is what I do. Google's one of my biggest positions. I bought it. I sold it at 186. I bought it at 153. I went up 120%. Like, I know what I'm doing better than you because that's all I do. That's what I do.
Right.
But he was so confident. And then Mitch said it instead of me, which made it nice. And he just was like, what? That can't be true. He's like, it's right here. Look, they're doing it. He's like, what? Because people can't take in all this, but he was certain. And I guess because he had a better education, let's say, than me, he thought he knew more. So these are all the factors that come into it. And no one goes back and goes and does a scale on how much they really know and how often they process it. They just keep building off of it because he
Yeah.
probably goes into most social circles and knows more than most people. So that's ultimately why people can feel so confident in it. And then it causes this big, it's like it's a giant black hole where they just fall into it. And then everything from there just gets worse because they dig deeper into that hole because their ego is tied to that. And they ultimately make poor decisions.
Mm. Which is why I have a cabinet full of supplements that I do not use. I went through this stage of listening to all these like health podcasts, and like each expert, in quotations expert, would say that they believe that this product is like the end all be all and it's going to help you in so many ways, and every single time I would buy it and I would try it and I'm like, oh, it's not working for me. um but in the moment it was like I was so excited because it felt like a quick fix, which there's no quick fixes in this world. I've had to learn that the hard way several times over and over again. And I know for myself, I heard that and I was like, that's all I needed to hear because it's easy. I can order this right now. I'm going to feel a certain way. But I didn't challenge their assumptions at all. I just believed exactly
Right.
what they said. I spent the money and I didn't challenge their assumptions. So the quick fix led me down a path of spending money because I believed exactly what they said, and then later found out that it wasn't real and it wasn't true. So I, for me, it came down to laziness and like overconfidence in this person that sounded smart, right? Like I don't know who has time to research all this stuff on a deep, deep level, but it does stray us in the wrong
Correct.
direction.
Yes, and that's where when you're listening to podcasts or people talking or the news, they typically have people who are called experts who really aren't experts. They're just people who made the TV, and that gives people more information that is worthless but sounds important.
Yeah,
And that's ultimately why we fail for this. And if you don't have a decision competency scale and a way to check it, you're going to keep making these mistakes. And I think people just want to be on autopilot. Making hard decisions and checking your ego and making mistakes is hard because you have to say, I really made it. And I've made mistakes, but I've learned from that. And over the past 9 years, I've really refined that. Well, 9 years ago is when I really nailed the process. And since then, I just keep making it better. That doesn't mean I don't lose money in down markets. It just means I'm better positioned and prepared to take advantage of it. It's like when you're out in the big open sea, all boats are getting rocked around. The question is, are you calm and prepared to pull in your sail, so to speak, and be, or are you going to just keep plowing ahead? And ultimately, that overconfidence is what leads a lot of ships to sink. And then people
yeah,
get scared, they pull out. I mean, one of the biggest and best hedge funds sold everything at the very bottom of the COVID. And, now he's talking about policy. I'm like, you literally sold at the bottom of COVID. It came right back up. You did the opposite of what you tell people, yet here you are. Another guy who talks about being brilliant sold Netflix when it was $200 and now it's 1,000. And he's like, they're not going to make it. I'm like, they made it. You know, and that's ultimately how you look at things. And once you realize that, you got to tune out the noise, really figure out what's important to you. And it is hard to work with people because I don't think most people want to do this really in-depth analysis. But I think right now is a critical juncture because the US and that's why I want to do this now is because the US has separated itself from all of its partners. It's like you're fighting with your best friends and neighbors, so they're not going to want to include you in their success anymore. And now you're it's like you're self-sabotaging yourself. And when you do that, you can't take on the whole world, even though we're the biggest and wealthiest country in terms of that. You can't take everybody on. The worst thing about going to war is going to war without your best friends. And that's
Mhm.
what we've essentially done. And this is going to be a steep price where most people also have this home bias in the US markets because we live here. We think we know more than other people about our markets. So then we put more confidence in them. And most people aren't going to, and I'm not going to say this because I don't give free advice in that terms, but how you allocate overseas is really going to be important. And a lot of people are buying Russia and don't even know it, buying China and don't know it. And China's, hasn't done anything for the last 15 years because they choose their country over capitalism. So their stocks really haven't done as well as say ours, where we're the extreme of capitalism over our country. So, but when things shift, it's like you're on the Titanic and we're heading for the iceberg, and everybody's like full steam ahead. We can't sink the ship. And that's where the smartest investors will probably pay a tremendous price and may have to work 5 more years.
Right. So, I mean, how do we become experts and like manage the blind spots? Like, how do we not stray? How do we see the full picture?
You gotta take tests to humble yourself. Like indexing is a good way to do it, but you also have to pay attention to what's important to you. There's Most people have overconfidence. And so that's why you have to kind of have a plan. Where's your money? What is your time frame? How is your allocation? And most of the time, you're probably going to be okay. But then there's peaks and valleys. And if you're heavily invested in 2000, the US, we had our overconfidence, and then the Nasdaq took 15 years to recover, which sounds crazy, and that can happen. So understanding you don't want everything in it, having cash available, and then you can work with me if you have enough, but if when the markets come down, do you reallocate that capital? Do you put it somewhere? Because in 2022, even bond markets were down 15%. And most people couldn't reallocate the bonds because stock market's down 20 and you're down 15 in the bonds. You don't have you lost everything. So I always put cash aside so that when things occur, which they always do, that I can buy at a low point. So that's what I do. Now I don't know if most people can do that because they're always trying to squeeze a penny out of a dollar, and I
Mm,
don't want to do that. And so over time, there's always events happening. There's always things that we can't forecast if we invade Iran or whatever the case, or whatever happens, you that's how I think people need is always have cash available because cash won't go down, but being fully invested, even bonds can go down. And especially if the US continues to overspend, we have this extreme confidence in our dollar, but the dollar is weakening and our bond prices, less people are buying them. So if there's less confidence and you have all your money here, we might lose 20% of our value of our dollar and you would lose again. So there's a lot of overconfidence in US, and I know, and we're US and we're dominant, but that's insulting to the rest of the world. And
mm,
that's another thing because they usually say Americans talk very much and are very overconfident when you go
yeah.
overseas. It's true, we're other people are humble. So that's kind of understanding when you travel, be more humble, be less rude, be more affable to learning. And so you really have to do that. And I think you have to write down and map out your strategy. I've come across a lot of people that are extremely overconfident. They're like, I'll be fine. I'm like, you're not going to be fine if things go 60% of the way, I think. And that's where
Right.
they have this blind, where they've saved well, but then they have to take the money out. And they're under the impression that things are going to keep going up. And so I always say, have you looked if your accounts don't go up for 10 years based on what you do? And they're like, no. So that's just a very simple thing. So you want to spend more, but you don't. And so these are little tiny things where sit down, write everything down. You can get my book. It's about writing down what is enough, understanding things, maybe taking down all of your possessions and just owning what you need and then focusing on your family and other things. And but most people don't they want to be active and spend all this money on all things that they don't need. And ultimately, we don't know what the future holds, but I do think people need to be humble about investing. That is the one of the biggest blind spots I've ever seen. And it will happen again and again and again.
Mm. What role does self-awareness play in all of this?
I think to have the neuroplasty of examining yourself can be learned. Ellen Gu, the woman born in the US, she's 22 and she has that. She talks about being aware and being satisfied with the silver medal, where a lot of people never learn that. And it can happen. But when you sit down, you say, how can I improve? What can I do to improve myself? Ultimately, when I do anything, I say, have you sat down and really thought about the next year and 5 years? What are you trying to accomplish? And what are your goals? Do you want to be the same person you were today? Do you want to be better? And when people are self-aware, when they're meditating and growth-minded, they're more likely to have success because they are pushing their boundaries of widening their view and climbing. So they're less likely to have these type of blind spots. Whereas somebody who's fixed-minded, they're not trying to change themselves. The whole goal of life is to go from where you were to transform into the best version of yourself. And if you're doing
Mhm.
that, you're going to make less mistakes, but you'll probably make a lot on the way, but you're working to improve yourself, so to speak. And that's ultimately what I think is really important in life.
100%. So let's talk about how to avoid terrible money decisions. What are two or three habits that people can begin to implement immediately to help with that?
First is looking at how much you're spending. That isn't investing, that's savings. When you save enough, you create this cushion for whatever happens. That's investing 101.
Mhm.
When you save enough and you pay yourself first, whatever happens, if you lose your job 5 years early, you're going to have more money and you won't be under strain. When you have uncertainty in life and you feel pressure, one of the first things smart people do is they take more risk. And
Mm,
that can, they things were getting tight, so they bought more houses. And then all of a sudden the housing boom crashed. And now all of a sudden they've lost everything they've earned because they over leveraged and got overconfident. So if you don't want to be overconfident, you want to save slow and steady. And as you're building that, always keep a certain amount in cash. Even though it doesn't pay much, having that cash is the cushion for any down market. You can put money in if you lose your job. And one of the problems is when the stock market comes down, if you're pulling from your account and you have no cash, you're pulling at the worst possible time. So these are a couple of the things in planning before you get to investing. If you have the cash, if you have the plan, if you're saving, you're less likely to feel the burden of the market movements. So
mhm.
you're less likely to make the worst, which is pull your money out. You can't take the losses. And also figuring out whether it's indexing, whether is having a plan where you want to go. What is your rate of return? How do you want to do it? And when you kind of understand certain things, you'll then not make any decisions under duress. That's why having that cushion, which is really hard for Americans, because the average family spends $35,000 a year in healthcare, which is insane.
Yeah,
So we don't have a cushion. We call it capitalism, but we spend 30% of our money on healthcare and then 40% of our money on a mortgage, and then people wonder why we don't have any cash. But if you can, that is the number one goal because you won't have the fear to take more risk. And when you
mm,
don't have that fear, you won't put yourself up for situations. So you can, but and then don't overcompensate in one area, one stock. No matter what you do, I like stocks, but I buy indexes, buy a little index and a little stock, but never get more than, say, a 5% position or something like that, where even if you lost everything, you still have 95% of your money.
right.
So even if it went to zero, if one goes up 100 and one goes down, you're at even point. So, and a lot of people say, I know Amazon, I know Google, I know Nvidia, and they don't want to sell it. And yes, you might be the one lucky stock. I have one person that bought Nvidia and it's up like 10,000%, which is crazy. And it's like I had to strangle him to sell it because it's like it's gonna keep. I'm like, you bought it at like $5 and it's 200, and
Right.
someone who bought Home Depot, but then none of the other retail stocks went up. So you do have those occasionally. I had one client get Monster stock, put like $20 in it, and then it was worth Monster stock went up like 15,000% if you know the drink, Monster drink.
Yeah.
Like those are so rare. And the other factors, if you look at history, Amazon was originally $106 back in 2000 and it went to $6. So again, most people sold it. But if you had a small enough position in it, you don't really go back and look at it, and you're not feeling the pressure of that individual security. So if you
Mm,
have too much in it, a lot of people buy more of the shares and then double down and keep taking them. So that's where it gets worse. So never take too much of a position where you can get crushed by it. That's what people do. So figure out, I'm going to own at least 20 stocks. That way and be diversified, have different areas, and understand that if you buy Walmart and Target and who's the other one? Costco. Well, Costco and Walmart went up, and Target was just a terrible. But I don't feel the pressure because I diversified evenly between them. That's
right.
something most you say, I know Walmart, I know Target. Targets that you, and I'm like, well, I thought I knew Target. I shop at Target. I don't shop at Walmart or Costco. But I was dead wrong with Target. So I was right two-thirds of the time. That's really how you do it. Don't have that overconfidence. Have that diversification. Same with banks. People bought Bank of America, Citibank, and Citibank's been dead money for a long time. And Bank of America's done okay, but JP Morgan's done the best. So if I bought three stocks, I made all of my gains essentially in JP Morgan. And I wouldn't have known that. That's why I hit so many big home runs. I bought John Deere and Caterpillar. Caterpillar went up over 350%. John Deere went up a little bit.
Right.
So, and they're like, well, why didn't we buy more Caterpillar? I'm like, well, if I knew that, I would have just put every dollar I had and I would have ran off on my yacht. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
that's the mistake is thinking you know more. And I thought John Deere would probably do better because John Deere is trying to get into construction, but Caterpillar's just made a better product, so more people bought it. And
Right.
but I didn't get upset that my John Deere because I had it. So that's the areas where you don't put too much in. You buy this, you buy that, and all of a sudden, as you're learning, you start to see, wow, yeah, I was wrong. I thought Etsy would do better, and it didn't.
Mm.
I love Etsy, but I bought it at like 80, now it's 50, so I sold it. Because it's very hard to tell. And I thought PayPal would do well, and it didn't do well. So I sold
Right.
it. But other ones went up. So I try to avoid putting everything in one unless it's a mega company that's wide. But either way, that's really the important. Don't be confident, be curious, map out a strategy, get two or three in an area, and you're more likely to have success. That's what you do.
So what about the bias check? How do you build in a bias check into your decision-making process? Like, what does that look like?
When I look at things for the bias, I generally I have to do a little search, like who are the retailers? Who are the companies and what companies are trading in the US? Is it Caterpillar? Are there any international companies that I can buy here? Is it just John? Like you have to look at these because we typically take Coke did. And so you might say, "Oh, I see Pepsi everywhere. I know." You have to go through it. You might like Pepsi over Coke. So these are things, just because you like something doesn't mean your taste aligns with everybody else. So
Right.
you generally want to write down what sector it's in, and then what are the companies in that, and then take a little time and investigate, like what's popular, who sells what, because oftentimes what we believe, like over the past 10 years, Pepsi's lost and Dr. Pepper sold more than Pepsi, which is crazy because you don't think of Dr. Pepper as being bigger than Pepsi, and now it is.
Yeah.
That almost sounds crazy, but it is. So that's where your biases and your name brand recognition is not going to align up. And people often think, oh, I need chips, but then Google's making chips. So if you didn't investigate, what happens if Google just buys their own chips and doesn't? Well, then they're not going to buy as much from NVIDIA. So these are where you're looking at things and starting to learn. Even Amazon has some chips they're making now too, but the one company that makes them is Taiwan Semiconductor. So they're the plant that sells it to everybody. And if one company goes out of business, those Taiwan Semiconductor will sell it to everybody else.
Mm.
That's or ASML makes the lasers that every single company uses to build the chips. It's only one
Right.
company, just one, to make the best. So that's where you get the diversification. And so these blind spots are we're going for the chips, but you gotta go deeper, second and third level where you're looking down at the how are they made? Who's in the process of making them? Do you need silver for it? Do you need gold? Do you need concrete? So that's really how you avoid the biases is writing them down instead of just looking at something. And
Right.
ultimately, no one writes them down, or most people don't. And
Mm.
then reevaluating your portfolio over time because Blockbuster was a great investment. But over time, you just said, oh, we made money. We take some off the table. Let's look for the next Blockbuster. which was then Netflix or whatever the case it was. So that's ultimately what you're doing is you're constantly reevaluating. You're trying to find flaws in your thinking. That's how you
Mm,
avoid the biases. I thought this would be good. I was wrong. And when you start asking yourself, I was wrong in all these, then you start to actually improve your thought process because you're checking yourself against your own thought process.
right. Amazing. Tell us more about the work that you do and where people can find more information about you and your work.
They can find me at willryoung.com. They can book a discovery call. I think it's important. My goal is transformation. It's to build your wealth over time under the right structure. And I will teach you how to think, how to understand decision-making processes, how to make judgments under uncertainty, and guide you through that. Where most people are just in automation, I want you to learn the processes so that you have the confidence that we're not having the blind spots that everyone has, but few actually work to fight those. And that's ultimately where the best money is made, is doing the opposite of the crowd, and you make the most money because you're buying cheap and selling high. Hard to do.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this really amazing
Thank you.
conversation, Will. It was so good to see you again.
Thank you.
And to our audience, if today's conversation challenged your confidence, that was the point. So the goal isn't to eliminate the bias, it's to become aware of it. In a world drowning in information, clarity isn't about knowing more, it's about knowing how your mind works. So intelligence is power, but awareness is key. If you'd like to learn more about Will's work or his book, The Enough Equation, we'll include everything in the show notes for you to have access to that. So thank you for tuning in. We look forward to the next episode. Until next time.
Thank you.